When I spit bars in a rave, man, I go hard like Santan.
Hello and welcome to another Touchline Fracas interview special. Today I'm joined by two special people. Not only am I joined by my co-host Ife, aka Mr. Means. How you doing, man?
I'm not too bad, my friend. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm also joined by the Guardian's Ed Aarons. How are you doing, Ed?
I'm good, thanks. Good evening to you too.
Thank you. How is lockdown treating you? I feel like that's the icebreaker these days. That's like the equivalent of how you finding the weather kind of thing. That's the icebreaker in today's climate.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, I think like everybody, I'm kind of getting a bit bored of just being at home all the time. And I mean, I'm supposed to be on holiday at the moment, like in the old world. Don't want to complain about that though, because there's obviously a lot worse things going on.
Yeah,
sure.
But I think everybody looking forward to having football back. But I mean, for me, it's not that different day to day because we do go into the office sometimes, but haven't had to as much. But I often work from home anyway, so it's good to see how people have adapted, and I think that's positive for the future. Hopefully,
Sure. Just a quick background on Ed. Ed has just released a book. It's called Made in Africa. It's the history of African players in English football. So we'll put the link in of the book in our bio, so you guys can all purchase it. But yeah, Ed, the reason obviously we wanted to get you on the show is obviously we have a vested interest in football and the Black experience in football in particular. And I just wanted to know essentially like what it is that got you into following African football, and like what is your vested interest into football in Africa itself?
Well, it's quite a long story, as you can imagine, but I think
they're the best stories that I find.
I like telling it, to be honest, and I think I'm sure that a lot of people of my generation, well, hopefully can relate to some of this anyway, because, whatever, if you're white, black or whatever, But so I was 9 in 1990, the World Cup, and that's the first World Cup I remember. And England, Cameroon, quarterfinal. England were lucky to get through. They just showed it actually on BBC a few weeks ago. They had 2 penalties from going in. They had to beat Cameroon. They were the first African team to get to the quarterfinals, and Roger Miller, I don't know if people remember him, he was almost 40 at the time, and just had a brilliant celebration and everything, and it just sort of opened my mind to watching players from Africa. But also I have to say, actually, I'm from South London and I support Crystal Palace, although actually at that age I think I was a bit more of a Liverpool fan, to be honest. I wrote about this a few weeks ago, but anyway, but yeah, I used to go and watch Palace, and at the time, with my dad, and even though I didn't support them, I was watching Ian Wright, Mark Bright, John Salako, who's in my book actually, born in Nigeria, Richard Shaw, just so many black players, George Ndar, so many black players from the local area really, and that was another thing that kind of got me interested in black players as well, and I've always taken an interest in the history of black players as well. I've done quite a lot of stuff about Laurie Cunningham in the past as well. Yeah. But and then African players, in terms of African players, when I was a teenager, this is what I mean, in terms of other people maybe being able to relate to this. People like Peter Unlove and Tony Yeboah, and then going on, people like JJ Okocha, Kanu, and players like that, coming up to the turn of the century. That was my teenage years, and it really just captured my imagination. It's like, I think a lot of people would agree, hadn't really seen players like that in England, hadn't really ever seen a player like Kanu before or even since, maybe, because he was quite unique. Or Okocha, again, another Nigerian, but a totally different size and stature and different player, but so exciting to watch. I didn't support Bolton or anything, but just that kind of
watching them.
Yeah, I just like watching them, and then so in my professional, I became a journalist, and I've sort of carried that on within that, and I went to live in South Africa for 2 years for the World Cup. So I thought that was a very important moment for African football, hosting the World Cup. didn't quite turn out with like 10 years on, didn't quite turn out as everybody hoped. But it was I was there for that Ghana game, against Uruguay.
Yeah.
Suarez.
Oh God.
Look at your face smile. Look at his smile.
Those back then, I don't know if people remember what like video technology was like, but it was awful. Like I had a digital camera and I was in the very back row. I think it was in soccer. I can't remember what ground it was in. Anyway, the very back row of a massive stadium. And for some reason, I started filming that corner. I think it was a corner when he handballed it. So I've got my reaction live on it of like, wow, like everyone's going handball, and it was like crazy. And when it all happened, it all unfolded, and they lost and everything. I honestly felt so gutted, and like more gutted, or as gutted as I ever had about England losing or something like that.
The devastation of it all must.
Yeah, and it was like, because to be there at that time, everyone took on Ghana as their team.
Yeah,
unless you're Nigerian, of
apart
course.
from Nigeria.
Apart from Nigeria. Apart from Nigeria. But yeah, everyone in Africa, I think it was a sort of sense around the world as well. Everyone wanted an African team to do well in that tournament.
Yeah.
To be fair,
so close.
Yeah. To be fair, even me being Nigerian, like in terms of heritage, anyway, I know it's more. I was rooting for them. Don't get it twisted. I wanted them to go through, but just the inner Nigerian within me, once that happened, it was just almost like, yes. It's terrible.
That's probably one of the biggest rivalries in African football, in Africa, just not just in football, in everything, isn't it?
Period. So it was just like, it was sad, but there was an overwhelming relief because you just wouldn't have heard the end of it. So it was a bit of a.
What's the furthest Nigeria have got in the World Cup?
Nigeria, second round.
Second round, okay.
Yeah, 94, but that was another great team. And actually, that team was quite important for like players like, I'm not sure many people remember him, but Daniel Amakachi, who was at Everton. He was one of the first Nigerians. I'll speak to him in the book as well. But yeah, so I think, all that experience in Africa, I know, it made me really love it even more, African football. And just thinking that it was such an underrepresented area of football, especially in England. In other countries, they really have kind of honoured their, the African influence in France and Portugal, like Eusebio with Portugal, people like that. But here it's kind of taken a long time for us to get there, and I thought it was something that was really needed. And some of the stories are just unbelievable that I've not uncovered, but told. Some of them kind of found out a little bit, or a little bit more than maybe other people had before, and some of them I'm just telling the stories that other people have uncovered, and like how they all came about as well. It's just all very interesting. I think so. Anyway, hopefully other people will. Well.
Yeah, I'm sure they will when they read the book for sure.
Yeah, I listened to your podcast on TIFO actually the other day, which is obviously why I reached out to you. And I heard some of the stories. Obviously, you said I've started reading your book thanks to that you've sent it over to me. I've started reading it, and there are quite some very intriguing stories that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find in a book about football. It's quite movie like, some of the stories, some
of them are unbelievable. I mean, like the first chapter's got Stevie Wonder in it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's a crazy story, isn't it? And just to think, just to fill people in, it's about Arthur Wharton, the player who's the first African player who's from, to play in England, who's from the Gold Coast, as it was called then, which was Ghana.
Ghana, yeah.
We've mentioned him before. And he came over in 1880, in the 1885 is when he first played professionally. But he was also like 100 meters world record holder as well. And like Usain Bolt is aware of him now, and is the guy that helped to bring his story to the world is like working with Usain Bolt and stuff. And he's gone a lot. He's put his whole life into it. He's called Sean Campbell. And yeah, I mean, he's the reason that there's a statue of him at the St George's Park, where England train and everything. So that's an amazing achievement for somebody who was 20 years ago, like literally no one had heard of him, because he was like, I think this is a theme in the book. A lot of black people in Britain that just in the old days was not wiped from history, but no one honoured them, and their names were forgotten. And this guy was buried in a pauper's grave in Yorkshire. No one knew about this, his athletic career.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just what the first 3 or 4 characters in the book, as it goes through the years, they're very similar, unfortunately to say.
Yeah.
Some of them end up alcoholics. A few of them some of them ends up in jail. Like it's really quite sad what happens to them, and I think it's everybody takes a bit of blame for their own failings in life and stuff. But I think in this case, it's really sad to see like the environment that contributed to their downfalls.
Right. So just going back a little bit in regards to because as you mentioned, Italy, France, they've like embraced African players going over there and playing. Why do you think, or what were the barriers do you think that prevented it? Well, that made it a lot harder, or it took a lot longer for it to be embraced over here, in your eyes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if you compare us with France, there's a big difference. So I'm not sure most people will know, but Just Fontaine, who has got the record for the most goals at any World Cup.
Yeah.
I think it was 14 in 1958.
Yeah.
Was from Morocco, and he played for France. And then, as I mentioned before, Eusebio was born in Mozambique, played for Portugal, was top scorer at the 1966 World Cup. And I think there was 3 or 4 players from Angola and Mozambique who played for Portugal in that World Cup. So at that time, they were using their colonies to benefit their national teams. They knew the ability of African players even that long ago. Whereas in England, it was a lot of distrust, I think, and it's all about the sort of the method of colonialism as well, like English colonialism. It was like at arm's length, was French. They convinced the people that they were French citizens, and it's quite a big difference actually. It's very interesting history if you look into it, and also we had work permit restrictions like we do now as well, but then it was absolutely no foreigners. So if you look back in the 60s and 70s in English football, there was no foreign players, let alone, not even European players we're talking about, let alone African players, until the 70s. And then it slowly started to happen in England. But yeah, I mean, I talk about Belgium quite a lot in the book with Divock Origi's dad, who's from Kenya. And his family's like a sort of football dynasty from Kenya. But his dad, Divock's dad, was the first to come to Europe, because I talked to his brother, so Divock's uncle, who's called Austin Odor, and he was a great player as well. But in the 80s, when he was top player, there was no pathway there. There was no chance of you even if you were the best player in Africa, no one went to England. So, whereas his little brother Mike, who's Divock's dad, a few years later in the early 90s, went to Belgium in Genk and did really well, and that opened up a pathway. He moved to Belgium. Divock was born there. Divock now plays for Belgium, and he plays for Liverpool, and it's kind of that's how it's had to happen. There's been no organic process for African players like there has been for maybe Spanish players or French players or whatever. They've had to literally fight to get their to get into Europe and show their ability. It's been not really a level playing field.
When you talk about French colonialism, is it the same in terms of Belgium's relationship with black people as well? Is it like a similar kind of thing that you're talking about?
Not in terms of because Belgium, obviously, if you're King Leopold,
Belgium,
all that stuff.
Very, very
I mean, I think all forms of colonialism were pretty bad. I think we all accept that. But the French method, it was kind of, there was like, even now they have a lot of overseas territories where you're, like in Guadeloupe, for example.
Like Thierry Henry from there, right?
Yeah, or New Caledonia, where Karen Burr was from. You're French. You play, even though he's born in the South Pacific, is part
French Guyana as well with Malouda.
Yeah, and whereas Britain doesn't have as many of those anymore. But I think also the French, they that's what they did. They used their colonies a lot more. British tended to. It was like British didn't let many people come over to Britain to live until after the war. Really, it wasn't. Whereas in France, I think there was a lot more coming, especially from North Africa. It was a lot more immigration from there earlier. So,
well, in terms of like academies and like you said, like pathways and stuff. So first of all, I want to kind of get clarity. what league in Africa would you say is the strongest league in terms of their players and academies as well?
Well, I think the strongest leagues are the teams that normally win the African Champions League are like
the Egyptian teams,
or the North African team. And Zamalek and Al Ali. And it's crazy. I went to Egypt in the last summer, and the passion that those guys have for the game is unbelievable, and they're real heavyweights. But I mean, it's a little bit misleading in a way, because obviously Egypt's produced a lot of players, and there's been that pathway. Well, I talk a lot about this in the book. It's quite a lot of failures before Salah came from Egypt. And he was actually, before he came, he was compared like badly with El Mohammadi in Egypt. When he was at Chelsea and he flopped.
Yeah.
Well, it's harsh to say he flopped. Mourinho didn't really give him a chance. Yeah. Everyone was like, why can't you be more like El Mohammadi, because he's like, consistent. He's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
But
so
I think,
strange.
Yeah. But then, it just shows you like what just being given a chance can do for you.
Bit of faith.
But in terms of like academies, and I go into this a lot in the book actually about this. I think Senegal is the number one country really, and they're producing so many players. It's really remarkable actually. These two academies, which I talk a lot about in the book, are called Generation Foot, which is where Sadio Mane came from, and also Ismaila Sarr from Watford, and then also the Ambars, which I'm sure people have heard of. Arsenal fans will know because of Vieira. He helped us. And I speak to the founder of that in the book, and well, in fact, both of the academies, and they're just producing so many good players. I think if you want to list some of them, also Papi Cisse as well from Generation Foot. Idrissa Gueye was from the Ambars. I think the last AFCON, more than half the squad were from those two academies, and that's just two. So and like they're getting good coaching and using good facilities. And you're seeing a lot of players coming through, and they have this ambition. The guy told me to win the World Cup, and like, why not? Like they've never won the.
Yeah, I think when you look at the pool of African players, it's not inconceivable to think that if Africa were to keep the main nucleus of players that they have disposable to them, like in terms of like dual citizenship and stuff like that, like if the African players who play for France or even England, then played for their home countries. It's perfectly conceivable that that African nations could be powerhouses of world football.
Yeah,
I think it's the key. The key is for especially Senegalese players. They get to Europe probably younger than most countries, and like these academies have got link ups with clubs in France, like Generation Foot. They go to Metz, who are actually quite a low level now in France as well, so they can really bed them in young, and then they go to so Sarr went to Rennes after that, and then he goes to Watford for 30 million. And the next move with him, he looks exceptional. It took him a bit of time. He's the classic, good example. It took him a few months to settle in. It always takes any player from anywhere time to settle in, but he's so talented, and I think they're definitely a country to watch. I think actually it's the fact that they produce more professionals in Europe per capita than any non-European country anyway, definitely.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's insane.
Yeah, and it's not very big, they have 40 million people there, I think, so
yeah. You mentioned before, I think you mentioned on the TIFO podcast that the Senegalese academies felt like they were being undercut in terms of their valuation for players, like if you would compare it to maybe the Brazilian market, or the South America market in general, not just the Brazilian market, that the price that their players are valued at is significantly lower than maybe what a European club would value the next star coming out of Santos or Boca Juniors or whatever. Any insight as to why that may be?
Yeah, I think it's just a legacy of history, isn't it, really, unfortunately? And taking it away from football, I think people realise that Africa is like, it's dominated by the rest of the world, and it doesn't really have much of a say over what happens to its raw materials, if you like, if you want to, strip it down to that kind of thing. And it's a real shame, but I think things are starting to change slowly. But I can, in the interview that I did with the Sayasek, the founder of the Ambars, he's very frustrated about it because it isn't fair, really, if one player has been he's offered half a million euros. I think he said to me for his best player. He's like one of the best young players in the world. He's just played at the Under-17 World Cup, and then his a similar player from Brazil is worth like 50 million euros at the same age. Doesn't really make sense.
No, in the African academies, do they do like what Brazil do with like third party ownership, and they like continue to keep? I know it's kind of like I don't know the exact like legal ramifications around it, and I'm sure people have found a way around it. But is there that kind of like third party ownership element to it in with these African academies, or?
I think that possibly there might be some. There's something going on. But I think, in the background, that there's a lot of murky stuff going on in football. That there's third-party ownership is obviously strictly illegal, under FIFA's rules. But
we all know it goes on.
Like, what is quite interesting though, and I think it's fair to say this, that I won't get in trouble for saying it, but if a big agency did try to specialise on African players, they could probably make quite a big. A big killing, a big profit, because you look at they spoke on the podcast about the Tifo one about Wilfred Ndidi, and the sort of just selling. He came from Nigeria for not much money, a few $100,000 I think, to Genk, and then in 18 months he's going for sort of more than 20 million, and they'll have a sell-on fee for him as well, which he's get a big move probably. Like we're talking a lot of money for somebody like Ndidi.
And now he's linked to Chelsea, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably the best in his position in the league. Most people would agree, and so and they'll get a sell on for that. And that's only really, although they probably played a big role. Again, I'm talking about played a big role in his development. Is it worth all that money for 18 months' worth? No, work. The Nigerian system that produced him should be getting more of that money, shouldn't they? Really?
Yeah.
So it's difficult. It's hopefully a system will develop that's a bit more fairer over the years as people realise the value of African players.
We like in our like amongst Touchline Fracas, we always have a discussion about North African players and North African players having this. It's almost like a unique array of talents in terms of being mavericks and highly technical players. Is there any insight as to why they are this type of player? Like so often they tend to be wide players that are very, very quick, technical as well, and have a lot of flair. What do you know why, or is there any insight as to why they produce so many of these types of players?
You're talking about North Africans specifically.
North Africans, yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, you talk about Mahrez or Salah, but there's lots of players like that. I think it's kind of most of those guys are like from France. They grow up in France, don't they?
Yeah.
In the banlieue, and they play in like it's similar to in London and urban areas in England. You play in tight spaces, in playgrounds, and it's doing some tricks is like sometimes better than scoring a goal in the playground. And I think so. It's a traditional thing as well, isn't it? If you're from a country that's produces little magicians like that, and people will be trying to emulate him. Whereas, you know what I mean? Like I don't know, in Ghana, for example, they don't really have players like that. They all want to be like SEN, who's a bit more
strong powerhouses. Yeah,
it kind of works like that in football. I think trends and like people want to be like the recent hero kind of thing in that country.
That's interesting. That's a fair point. Because even here, but I think with England, for example, I feel like we take inspiration from other people. So and that's funny culturally, but in terms of players as well, growing up, you want to be a footballer, you're looking at Ronaldinho. So you're looking continentally as well, intercontinentally. You're looking at Ronaldinho, looking at the Kakas, especially for my generation anyway. So I could see why, in terms of like the idols and national team idols as well, I could definitely see why they'd be looking at certain players that especially influence them and make them want to be quite similar in terms of their play style. I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah, of course. I think African players have influenced. I mean, I'm writing this in the book actually, but not many people remember Tony Yeboah, but he was absolutely brilliant.
I remember that one goal. We almost broke the goal.
He scored that goal, and I think it was a few days later he scored like another one. Almost as good, but not quite. So I think
the other one a volley?
I think that was against Wimbledon, Liverpool.
Yeah.
But But anyway, so I was a striker at that age, and like 14 or something, and I was like, oh, I want to be like that guy because he used to just smack the ball so hard, and I was like, used to go and practice.
That's like Hasselbank.
Like that, you know, like, and that's just what it's like, isn't it? If you have whoever's the best player, everyone wants to be. Like Sancho at the moment is really, everyone wants that playground player now.
Yeah.
He's got all those tricks, but he knows how to use them.
Yeah.
And he's, talking about your environment and stuff and different influences in South London where he grew up. I've done a few articles about this for The Guardian, but like, you've got so many, it's a melting pot of cultures and stuff, and people, there's a lot of Colombians, for example, who live around there in that area. And Poveda, who's gone to Leeds, he's from a Colombian family. And I imagine that, they have kind of like, culture offs when they're in the cage kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Colombian tries his, and the guy from Trinidad does his thing, and it all comes together.
Yeah.
It's good. We're in a good position in England. We're lucky, I think. We're going to see the fruits of that in the next few years.
I think South London undoubtedly produce the best players. I think they're holding England up at the moment, aren't they?
At the moment, but you know what? Via different parts of the country, of London, Birmingham, wherever, Manchester, they're going to see. Well, we don't. South London's not the best. We're the best. We're going to try and catch them up. That's good. I think competition helps, isn't it? So.
Yeah, certainly. Just you mentioned AFCON a bit earlier, and I wanted to ask you a few questions about African Cup of Nations actually, because it's a tournament that I don't feel is respected on the not respected, maybe too strong. It obviously is respected, but isn't as respected as maybe it should be, considering the level of talent on display. And I was just wondering what you think is the reason for that, and what maybe could be done to make like the AFCON a more appealing competition to people. Obviously I think they've changed the dates now, so they play it in the summer, even though I think they're changing it now to go to back for the Cameroon one, right?
It kind of sums up the issue with it, I think, that they can't decide, and it's weird, but I have a lot of sympathy for them because they have to work around the European season and stuff. So like well, they're expected to, but they don't. They tried it last year. I went to Egypt for in the summer. It was ridiculously hot, but they managed to do it. And then they've changed it now because of problems in Cameroon and the weather and stuff like that. But I think one suggestion, which I don't think they're going to do, but it doesn't go down well when I say it, or when other people say it, but is to have it every 4 years. Simple. Because why do they need to have it every 2 years?
Yeah, why do they do it every 2 years?
Because of money.
How often is the Copa America? Is that every 4 years as well?
No, Copa America is it every year or every 2 years?
I think it's I think it's every year actually, isn't it? Yeah.
It certainly did go to being like every year. I don't know if that was like a one-off or...
It's again down to money, and I imagine that was because of all the all the bribes that they were being paid. The more competitions you have, the more TV rights you can. I'm just reading that book actually, Red Card. FIFA.
Yeah. To be honest, I mean, Europe are probably they're going down like a similar route anyway. We're doing this new what's the, I don't even know what the tournament is called, that we're the Nations League, and it's kind of another tournament, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that the Euro, the schedule that we've got in Europe is much more sensible, and it gives a break. In the odd years and stuff. Whereas in Africa, especially if it has to happen in the middle of the season. I mean, Klopp said in the interview to me, and at the time it had just been moved to the summer, and he was really happy about that. You could tell he was like, I don't think we could have signed 3 players like they've got Keita, Salah, and Mane. I don't think we could have had 3 players like. If that hadn't happened.
And then they go missing for 4 weeks.
Say he wants to buy Samuel Chukwueze, who's brilliant, by the way, from Villarreal. I'm sure you like him. But yeah, they want to buy him. He's probably going to have second thoughts about it because you can't have 4 of them. Yeah, it's going to be next. It's not long away. We're talking about in the next year. So
it shouldn't really be something you have to think about as a domestic club manager. Thinking,
Mourinho has always been quite a strong supporter of African players as well. He says it's unfair. Over the years, I looked at it, and he's been on the record quite a few times as saying that it should be moved and it shouldn't happen in the middle of the season and stuff. We have to respect African players, and it's really not. I did an interview with Cheku Kouyaté from Palace in Senegal, and he was really quite angry about it. It was only a few days after they moved it back to January. He was really quite angry about it, like haven't asked us players. We think.
Also angry about the fact it was moving, or angry about the fact that people are making a fuss over.
No, the fact that it was moving back to January, basically,
Okay.
and you know, because his main concern, rightly so, is he wants to be in there for Palace every game. He's getting paid a lot of money to be there, and asking them to leave for sort of, it's almost like 6 to 8 weeks, isn't it? Basically,
Yeah, sure.
Training and everything. It doesn't help. Also, it doesn't help him if he has to leave Palace and has to go somewhere else.
Of course, it kind of devalues them as a player as well, doesn't it? It's like for that season,
you could probably maybe pay an African player less because of that as well.
Because of that,
that would be used against them. That will be used against them because you're not going to be around for 8 weeks.
So I think it's trying to strike a balance with like making money out of it, which they obviously need to do to fund like youth development and stuff like that. And then you might see some better African performances at the World Cup as well, I think, because players would be a bit more rested.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen some great African sides in World Cups. Well, sides that we think should do well, like the Ivory Coast comes to mind, where they had this tremendous pool of players that was, I can't remember what World Cup it was exactly. Was it maybe 2010?
Yeah,
2006 and 10. Yeah. They did really badly, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't think they got out of the group, did they? But I think one of them, they had a really tough group, though.
They did, I think that was 2006.
Was maybe like Holland and Germany in the same group or something like that?
Yeah. So I mean, they've always flattered to deceive, and it's really one of my favourite teams actually was Senegal in the 2002, which was a brilliant team of just showing you how much talent there is there. Like hardly any of those players had none of them had come through an academy system, if you like, at the time. It was all like guys who'd managed to get themselves to France and like just work their way up, just being good. Like maybe they had a cousin or like an auntie who lived there or something like that. Yeah, and they were a really raw team, like El Hadj Diouf, everyone remembers him.
Salif Diao.
But they made the most of their talents and really exciting team. But I think it was very disappointing at the last World Cup because none of them got through. Even though again Senegal were good, they should have got through. They got knocked out on yellow cards in the end. So.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
insane.
Senegal were our adopted team for the World Cup, actually.
Because they're the PNP team of the tournament.
Yeah, we'll have to explain to Ed what PNP is soon. Maybe that's a.
No, we can explain it briefly.
Yeah, we can.
PNP is basically an acronym for Pace and Power, and I guess it's a mockery on the idea. Yeah, it's a mockery on the idea that pundits and journalists and commentators only referencing African players' pace and power. When it comes to skill, technique, all of the flair, none of that is intelligence. Generally gets thrown out the window. Always reference is
Idrissa Gueye, probably one of the most intelligent players in the world.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
In a traditional sense, and indeed he mentioned him before as well.
Yeah,
but I understand what you mean. Like the stereotypes still come thick and fast, don't they? Especially Paul Pogba. He's a peer.
He gets it all the time. Which, as much as I understand, because Pogba is an incredible athlete, but the technical side often gets forgotten about him, which is. It's so strange to me. It's strange because it's so clear. It's clear.
I mean, his dad is from Guinea, moved to France in the '60s. So he's got that African flair about his feet. I've never seen someone so tall and angular, like with like feet like that, and like his passing sort of range, the chipping. He's a really unique kind of player. I've never seen a player like that really before him. I don't know. It's hard to compare him with anyone else, isn't it?
Very unique player.
Yeah, it's certainly in the position that he plays as well. Like in terms of what you were saying about big feet for a big man, not big feet, sorry, quick feet for a big man. Sorry, every big man's got big feet, I think. But yeah, quick feet for a big man. Maybe comparisons to like Kanu in that respect, kind of lanky and has like incredible ball manipulation and able to do certain things with the ball that you wouldn't expect of his size. I
think there's a similarity, but Carney was more sort of a skills merchant, wasn't he? And then, whereas like Pogba, some of the angles and the passes that he makes is like unbelievable, aren't they? he's really special talent. But I think I can understand why people would get frustrated with him, because it's especially Man United fans, because they don't see it enough, perhaps, of his amazing ability. He could be, but that's maybe a question for the manager as well. Getting the best out of him.
Definitely. Just going back to what we mentioned about the P&P thing. So obviously it's something that I think it's becoming more highlighted now, just in terms of like the media's coverage of black players and how they are described, whether that be on TV or in newspapers or you name it. What is it like in the industry right now? Like, is there like a consciousness about writing about black players and the way that that people are describing black players? Is there like a consciousness about it now, or I don't know. I guess I'm trying to rephrase the question in a particular way, but yeah, is there like do you have like a conscious feeling the way you are describing black players? Nice cat.
My dog is sorry about that.
Oh, dog.
He's all right. Yeah, sorry about that. I understand what you're asking me. Yeah, I certainly do, and I think like people of my generation do. I'm 39, and hope I think that some of the old attitudes are really like still present in football, unfortunately. And I've said this before on a podcast, I think, but when I first started writing this, I was really quite hopeful about English football. It looked like we were leading the way in many ways in like the fight against racism. I know that obviously there were still problems. I'm talking about in 2015, but then obviously in the last 5 years, it's gone crazy again, isn't it? And it's really quite shocked me, some of it, because at games I have seen a bit of racism, but I go to a lot of games obviously to cover them, and don't really see it in the stands, but seeing it on social media and stuff is like really quite scary, because people, like hide behind their Twitter handles and stuff like that. So, and obviously I do touch on this in the book as well, the Raheem Sterling statement about, the way that a black player and a white player were treated in the media. That was absolutely spot on. I absolutely agreed with him in that. And, I work for one paper, and not that paper that he was talking about, but I'd like to think that where I work, we do definitely, think about that sort of thing. And it's really, in fact, we had somebody coming in to tell us, who's she won the what's it called? An art prize. I think it might have been the Turner Prize or something like that. Anyway, and she was she'd collated newspaper cuttings of like where black people were sort of put with a headline that wasn't, subconsciously was quite racist, and she was pointing this out to us. And there's a few that I'd done as well, and it was like, actually, like thinking about it, like, I can see why someone would find that racist. Like even at the time, I wasn't thinking anything like that. I think it was actually, I remember the specific example that I did. I'll admit to this. It was, it was Aubameyang and Lacazette scored. I think the headline was like double trouble. Yeah, so you see like, the way that obviously it was like my point of view, trying to do like something that's like rhymes and like was bigging them up really. But actually, like from now, you could see that it looks like two black men. Double trouble doesn't look good. But, like that's the way. But so that actually opened my eyes quite a lot to just thinking a little bit more through. Obviously, I'm really, trying to be very conscious of that sort of thing all the time. Obviously, I've written a book about African football stuff.
Yeah.
A lot.
I was more thinking, like, just generally speaking about the industry perspective.
First, a lot of people in the office were quite, I think, a bit dismissive of her. And you can understand a little bit why, because it was, from their point of view, maybe seen like pernickety or whatever. But it's good to have somebody else who's telling you like a different perspective. I think opens your eyes.
Right, and I thought in those instances as well, I know that a lot of writers will probably feel like it's limiting their creativity as such, because they like I said, nitpicky. But at the same time, you don't want to cause offence. So, and there's plenty of ways you can say things, to be perfectly honest, and there's plenty of ways you could describe a photo or moment. So, I feel like picking and being careful with your language isn't a bad thing, And I feel if that's the shift that is necessary, I feel like it needs to be done, really and truly. But again, a lot of the time it's subconscious. A lot of the time people are doing it and not really seeing the problems and I guess the triggering that can occur. So it'll always be a constant battle, and I do think it will need, I guess, constant reminders throughout for it to kind of stick. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a matter of evolution, I think, and hopefully, I'm not writing off people of a certain age and stuff, because there's loads of good people out there of all ages, but as people who've grown up in multicultural societies, and it's just the norm for them, and they like it, and there's not a problem for them. They, as more this is, I'm being very idealistic here probably, but you'd hope that it's certainly the case where I live, people just live together, and there's no, as far as I see, you don't have racist incidents between us, but obviously it's different the way that the police treat people, though. That's something I can't. I don't get treated badly by the police because I'm white, but it's a totally, I can't comment on a black person. I just believe if someone says it that they get treated badly, I believe what they say, because the evidence is quite clearly there, isn't it? So, but yeah, it's about, I think, hopefully, evolution of attitudes over time, and that's a lot of what this book is about as well. At the start, you should see some of the, I put it in the book, some of the language that the newspapers used to use about Arthur Wharton. They use every word under the sun. You could go to prison for some of the language they use, and that was 100 years ago. And then you follow the story, it's got better. The people that they used to make Zulu chants at Albert Johansson when he was in the tunnel at Wembley when he was about.
That was the FA Cup final, right? Is that?
Yeah.
And
and it was just some of the stuff I've got. I tried not to do too much of it, but some of it is really sickening. Actually, makes your blood boil. And it's not that long ago, so you see how far we've kind of come from that point. There's no doubt we made some progress, although we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So hopefully, heading in the right direction, but still a long way to go.
Definitely.
So in terms of I guess we're talking about the discrepancy in treatment of I guess black people, and just we can just relate it back to black players again. Do you feel like African players as such, because I know Demba Ba had some comments in regards to salaries and being paid and being underpaid and feeling underpaid in the Premier League. And I'm not quite sure what his salary was when he eventually made it to Chelsea. But his comments about being underpaid and feeling undervalued in the league, you give us some insight as to that, and why. Well, I guess Premier League players are obviously going to be discussing salaries amongst themselves. So I just want to kind of understand where that came from and how we kind of came to understand or know that that's what was happening to him.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, actually. I was just thinking, I think I saw a stat the other day that Salah is now the 4th best paid player in the world. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe at the top end, it's getting better. But I think generally, as we mentioned, the African Nation Cup, that might be a reason that players get paid less. Mm-hmm. And maybe because clubs think they can get away with playing African players less as well. Mm-hmm. Just going back to something in the book, this is a good example of this, I think. And obviously things are a bit more professional now, but this was only 1993 I'm talking about. So Peter Ndlovu, who played for Zimbabwe and Coventry.
Fantastic player.
He was an amazing player, yeah. And so I think, I can't remember the exact numbers. Can I look it up? That's all right. I've got it right here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want to check how much he was getting paid when he first came, his first contract. So, and there's a story in the book about how this guy had a bet with his friends back in Zimbabwe. He was studying in England.
Is it £800 a week?
Something like that. I can't. Anyway, it doesn't matter the exact figure. Anyway, so just quickly say this story. This guy was a student in London from Zimbabwe, and he bet his friends, I can go and meet Peter Ndlovu and get his autograph. So he goes to the training ground, sleeps in his car overnight, and they don't speak the same language from Zimbabwe, but Peter said that he was from the same village. But anyway. And he was introduced to the manager and by Peter, and said, "Oh, Peter, this is my boss. This is my agent." And that's how this guy, Winston, who's a lovely man, became Peter Ndlovu's agent. And Peter, yeah, it's a great story. Peter didn't have an agent, and he was getting paid. I think it was a lot less than that. I think it was like 300 a week.
Wow.
Something like that. And then so Winston goes in to negotiates him for him, and like bought a suit especially for it, and eventually comes out with like 1,200 a week or something like that. And then so they were trying to get away with offering him peanuts, basically, the moral of the story. And it was only this guy who wasn't even a proper agent.
Yeah.
Like, knew it was business savvy enough to know that they were trying to rip him off, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that has gone on over the years quite a lot, actually,
Yeah. Do you think though that just in terms of Pete Enlove's in terms of his feeling at that point in time, do you think it was kind of like there was like a feeling there that I'll just take what is given, or I'm just trying to understand like the psyche behind, because surely you would know that you're being underpaid at that level. Is there like a part of maybe the psyche that is like saying, just accept it, I may not get this chance again, and
yeah, there
like
definitely was. Well, I mean, talking about a lot of the earlier players, there was like definitely there was that sense of like, I'm so lucky to be here, I don't want to upset them. It was like, kind of almost like subservient attitude, and like some of the but with Peter, I think he was only a kid. He was only like 20, 21, and he just like he got spotted in a match when they were on tour, and it was like a dream scenario, invited over. He's so good that he just rocketed it to the top, quickly. And I think even at that time, actually, I mean, people did have agents, but it wasn't the same as it was.
Sure, yeah.
Even England, players from England, it wasn't quite as professionally done back then. But still, yeah, I think it generally is quite a trend, especially from players coming from out. And there's a lot of vultures out there. There's a really good book actually called The Lost Boys, if anyone's interested about that. Like these guys who sell dreams basically to kids from Africa, and they like con men, and they end up in France, like or somewhere on the streets. Basically, someone promises them a career, and they might be the best player in their like country, even or village or whatever, the area, and they raise loads of money. Their family like sells all their stuff to get them over to Europe, and then they just left and they were like homeless, and,
Is that maybe is that a reason why?
Unfortunately,
is that like a reason as to why like work permits are so stringent over here to kind of stop things like that from happening, like the trafficking element of
that's part of it. And then there's just always a bit of protectionism about the Premier League, isn't it?
Keeping it British kind of thing. Don't want to.
I think it's more of a quality thing that they decided to do.
Right,
and
okay.
It's actually worked quite well, although it means our clubs have to pay like premiums for players. But it's pretty tough to get a work permit. You have to be, especially African countries, you have to be in the top 75 countries. Otherwise you can get special dispensation, but
sure, that's happened a few times.
Countries in the top 75 in FIFA.
No, because I was looking at Kolo Toure. I didn't realise Kolo Toure came straight to Arsenal from an Ivorian academy. I actually thought he went to Belgium along with Yaya, but he didn't. He came straight from Ivory Coast. But I checked. He was an Ivory Coast at the he was an Ivory Coast international at the time, I think.
Did he not play for Beveren as well? I think beforehand.
Okay, maybe Wikipedia is deceiving me then, because I actually did think he played in Belgium, but I think maybe you're right.
Yeah, that was one of the first link-ups, and you're seeing, there's quite a lot of these going around now that, really important.
Yeah.
I think it says he went straight from ASEC Mimosas, who was the big powerhouse team in it. I mean, this was something that Wenger did. I talk about George Weah and Christopher Wray, who was the first African to win the title. And Wenger just, he wasn't scared of bringing in a player straight from Africa. He brought in George Weah to Monaco, and he was, 6 years later, he was the best player in the world.
Yeah, and Christopher Wray's got some important goals for us in that 97-98 season and winning the double.
I have to say that's one of my favourite chats. I interviewed him for the book, and he's like, he's like genuinely thrilled to be like trying to track down and like remembered, because the first person to win the Premier League, first African person to win,
really,
or win any English title. Yeah, so
it's insane.
He was a trendsetter, and Daniel Amokachi was the first African to win the FA Cup. which was
Wow.
95.
And that's what I'm saying. It's not that long ago as well. It's
Yeah.
really it puts into perspective how not long ago that was. It's literally 15 years ago, which is wild. You know what I mean? It's literally wild. So
it's quite right. No, since I've got in the book, I've got like a list of all the players that have played since the Premier League. Anyway, the start of the Premier League, and it's like there's maybe about 40 max, like before the turn of the century, and then like 300 since then.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
Ed, I've got some. We put out to our listeners that you were going to be coming on the pod, and we've got quite a few listeners' questions. We won't go through all of them because I realise that you haven't got all night to talk to us. But if you don't mind, we've got a few that we'd just like to put to you. And
yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got one from our Discord server from 23_K_G. He asks, right. So he's got two questions, but we'll limit it to one. He asks, what African nations are producing the best hidden talents we may not have come across fondly in the league?
Well, I think there's some that maybe aren't quite yet in the league that are definitely to watch out for from Mali.
Okay.
Apart from Senegal, I mean, I've mentioned them quite a bit already, but Mali's youth system is unbelievable. They produce anyway. The players that are coming out of Mali, a lot of them are going into the Red Bull system. So they're like, there's a guy called Amadou Haidara at Leipzig. He's gone to RB Leipzig now, and he's very good.
Naturally go from
that's the path that in the book I talk a lot about. Mane and Keita both went that direction. So there's quite a lot of talent coming from Mali, and then where else? In Nigeria, there's a lot of good young players. It's just I think there's some. I've mentioned Chukwueze before, and Omniscient. I forget how to say that from Lille, the striker.
I'm
gonna send big powerful striker.
I'm playing his name really badly. I'm gonna get cussed now.
If they say his name, go on, say what.
I honestly don't even know how to say it.
He's been
Osman.
That's it.
Osman.
Yeah, and I think Nigeria looking good. Thing is, Nigeria always produces a lot of good players. It's just whether they end up at the top,
at the right clubs,
at the right club. Yeah, all sorts of different things. But I think Chukwueze definitely. I think
I've been watching him a lot because I support Chelsea, and I've always been quite wary about our right hand side, and I've always been looking at like quick left footed wingers that I've got to go for it. And Chukwueze is definitely one up there.
Chelsea have got a great heritage of African players, which I go into in the book quite a bit with SEN, do an interview with SEN, and talks about him. He used to go out in London with all the African guys, like in Peckham and Camberwell and places like that. It was quite interesting.
Fantastic.
It's interesting that Chukwueze actually came to Spain straight from Nigeria. That doesn't seem like a common pathway into Spanish football, where you wouldn't traditionally expect African players to go straight into Spain.
It's happening more and more, and I think everyone knows about Belgium and France, Germany joining the party, in Austria, as we mentioned, Red Bull. But there's a lot of German scouts now looking directly, and obviously Switzerland as well. That's where Salah came through with Basel. It's really everyone's trying to get in on the act, and there's been actually it's been going on for a while now that like clubs. This Barcelona coach has set up a big system in Africa, which took a lot of players to Qatar, to the Aspire Academy, and quite a few of them made it through that way. So it's really sort of a bit of a gold rush in a way for these scouts and club. But it's like I say, it's kind of it's on the edge. It's got to be regulated properly. Otherwise, there's going to be some criminals getting involved that do get involved with it, because it's there's rich rewards to be had if you find a really good player. So
definitely.
We've got another question from FIFA Fofam on Twitter. Said in the boy from Bambali, Ed touches on Mane downing tools because he had his head turned from Manchester United. How close was that deal to going through?
Yeah, I saw that one actually earlier on, and I was thinking about that. Yeah, I think there was a lot of interest, but I think he was quite keen on Klopp. And I know that he actually Tottenham as well. I think he believed he went to the training ground at Tottenham, and Pochettino really wanted him as well. But he decided to go to Liverpool. I think in the end it was pretty much always going to happen because he wanted to prove Klopp wrong. And I talked to Klopp about this, and he told me how he misjudged Sadio the first time he met him.
Yeah.
He was wearing a baseball cap, as he often does, I think, off the pitch. Maybe it was like at an angle, and he said he was like the way he said it to me was he was a cool guy.
Yeah.
He sort of German way, and he looked like a rapper and this stuff. And so this was when he was at Dortmund, and he turned down the chance to sign him. But I think Mane wanted to prove him wrong from that point, and he has. It's funny though. If you look back when he was at Southampton, he had a knack of scoring goals against Liverpool and doing
he did.
That's very interesting. It's interesting because it could have easily gone the other way. Because he was prejudged by Klopp, he could have thought, well, I never want to play for him again, or I never want to play for him, full stop. But the determination to prove someone wrong can do wondrous things, honestly, because like Didier Drogba against Arsenal every single time. I think
you'll find that Salah is also being driven quite heavily by Mourinho.
Yes.
And so is Kevin De Bruyne.
Kevin De Bruyne as well. Kevin De Bruyne may not even be. I think it might be the Chelsea thing in general, because I remember even when Mourinho wasn't there and he scored against us at Stamford Bridge, I've never seen De Bruyne celebrate like that ever in my life.
No, I know his agent quite well, and I know he was really affected by that, and he was determined to the way that he played in Germany that season. Was it Werder Bremen?
Werder Bremen, yeah.
He was unbelievable, and they're such a bad team. Like even that, everyone knows the crap they are now, but then they were not much better, and it was like a one-man team.
Yeah.
And anyway.
Yeah, I think
you're right. Revenge is a powerful force.
Yeah. SGANTSONTSO_ is the best way I can put it. Unfortunately, I can't. How do you? I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he asked if you could rank your top 5 greatest African players post 80s. That's a lot to choose from. I think that's going to be quite hard, isn't it?
No, it's all right. Post 80s. So in the modern era, then basically, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
What in England as well? Well, I think I don't. Yeah, no, I think
it doesn't have to be in England if you don't want to.
In terms of honours and influence, and as much as I don't like them, I have to say Didier Drogba is probably number 1. But yeah, it's really hard to somebody tried to did the top 8 the other day on Twitter, and I did mine, and I was like, oh, what about this guy? Yeah. So I mean, there's just so many. So I obviously like the modern players like Salah, Mane, and Mahrez as well. Yeah. Someone asked me why he's not on the cover because I couldn't get everyone on the cover. And I wish I'd got an Arsenal player on the cover now as well, because there was a lot of. I used to like Kanu a lot as well back in the day from that era, and as I said before, Yeboah and Lucas Radebe as well was a brilliant player. I don't know, Yaya Toure. Also got to be in there, hasn't he?
I think for me, Yaya has to be
probably the best centre midfielder the Premier League's had, maybe.
Yeah,
he's up there. He's definitely up there. Yeah, I think. I mean, those 5. It's just so hard to pick. I think it's easier to do it in sort of 10 year in decades, maybe. Yeah. I could do that. Like SCN as well. People remember how good he was.
Yeah. Do you feel like players? Well, I guess like Yaya Toure. Do you feel like his time in England was underrated? I guess, by the wider audience, and the wider fans.
A little bit. I think most people will recognise how good he was. But I think he didn't help himself with some of the, maybe it was him, maybe it was his agent or whatever, with some of the birthday cake things and all that. But he's, Yaya Toure is a very single-minded man, and he's he's done a lot. He's doing a lot and trying to be a role model and figurehead for anti-racism and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting the fallout with Pep Guardiola, though, wasn't it? I mean, I mentioned that in the book as well with the stuff for African players, and it was quite a sad way to end it though, because obviously he's a massive hero at City. But if he felt that way, then it's good that he, if that's what he thinks, then he should say it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, Yaya's story in general is amazing. I can't remember where I've heard it, but just I think it may have been Graham Stack talking about some of Yaya Touré's like when Graham Stack was on loan at Beveren, maybe he was there with Yaya Touré, and he talks a lot about his experience working alongside Yaya, and he just said like when he first saw him, he was unbelievable at football. He couldn't believe how amazing he was, but he was such a quiet guy. It's a really good story actually. I can't remember where I heard it, but it was
absolutely brilliant. I think everyone will remember it that he carried, and at City, I mean, he really was like a catalyst for them turning into a super club, really, wasn't he? He was like, and also actually, I'd like to mention Vincent Kompany. I know he's not African birth, but his dad was from Democratic Republic of Congo, mentioned in Belgium earlier and everything, and he was a political prisoner and stuff.
Oh wow!
So and the influence of Kompany in Man City and in English football is massive as well. And I think he would be the first to admit his African heritage is very a massive part of him.
Yeah,
he's definitely
great leader.
An ambassador from football, 1,000,000%. I think I don't think it's very difficult to, even like an opposing fan, and you could get quite tribal, but in terms of Kompany, it's very hard to find bad words to say about him. Just given his aura and the way he speaks and how eloquent he is, it's very difficult to.
I mean, you can imagine somebody like him being a real leader beyond football, couldn't you? Like his dad's the first black mayor in Belgium.
That's incredible.
I wouldn't put it past.
It's like he's destined to do it, isn't it? It's like written in the stars.
I don't know what role he could have, but the world needs somebody like that at the moment. Don't they? Somebody eloquent,
100%.
International person as well.
Yeah,
100%.
So many languages, and he's lived in England and he's lived in Belgium, and he's a great guy. And it was just apt. I thought, even though Liverpool didn't win the title, and my book is a lot about the last season, that goal that he scored, and that was the day before Liverpool beat Barcelona as well in that crazy game. And it was mad. It all just came together. Like everyone remembers those few days.
Great game.
Man City were doing nothing in that game whatsoever. Didn't look like scoring. It was just
amazing goal. And I've got a good quote. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like if you don't try, I was like, who else is going to do it? And I said, I might do it myself.
I actually remember him like running up to take that shot. And I was like, no, Vincent, don't do it, Vincent. Like, and then I just watched it going. I was like, oh my, thank God, thank God.
You know what it was? I remember he did an interview after scoring that goal, and he was like, Sane tried to tell him don't shoot. Bernardo said don't shoot. And he said, you lot have said it, I'm going to shoot now. He said, I'm going to shoot now. And then it was
an apt moment, and like he's so really gracious the way that they won it as well. I think it was just unbelievable title race, wasn't it? That I'll never forget. That was really, really exciting.
Yeah.
So a final question from me: what's your top 5 African national team? So based on talent, currently, what would you say is your top 5?
Well, I mean, I'm going to base it a bit on what I saw last summer. In Egypt, and it's hard to look past Algeria at the moment because they did win it, but I've got a soft spot for Senegal, as you probably realise. And Nigeria obviously did okay. They're getting there, but it's a new generation, new team. And Egypt, obviously, with Salah. And then it's quite open, really. This is the good thing about it as well. And we're seeing it with, like, I mentioned this earlier as well to somebody, but Mabwana Samata, first Tanzanian. We're seeing people from like East Africa coming to England now as well, which is great. And there's a lot more players around, like from less well-known African countries, and it means the standard is generally getting higher. So it's quite hard to pick. Like Morocco have got a great team at the moment. Hakimi from Dortmund,
fantastic player.
Amazing player. And it's not just him. They've got lots of players. Ziyech, exactly. Really coming to the fore now. So there's a lot of good teams around. I was hoping that Morocco might do quite well in the last AFCON because I like Hervé now, the coach, but they didn't quite hit it a lot, set it on fire. But, there's lots of teams to choose from, and they've all got great nicknames as well. It's a good thing about it.
You mentioned Egypt being, because I think whenever you talk about African football in general, Egypt always have to be mentioned, and they've always done well in the AFCON, but never been able to translate it into World Cups, and I was just wondering why is that? Why are they so good in their home, like in their continental competitions? But I don't have how many World Cups they've been to? Maybe
It's only two.
one.
It's only two now.
Is it two? Is it? Yeah.
Well, the first one, they actually had a really good team. And anyone I don't know, you guys remember this, but they were in England's group in 1990, and England
Wasn't
drew
born.
0-0. No, sorry, England beat them 1.
I'm just born.
England beat them 1-0, and it was a really tight group. That group, it was really boring. Like everyone remembers 1990 World Cup, like it was like, you know, Gaza, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
But in our group was England, Republic of Ireland, Holland, and Egypt, and it was like nil. All the games were 0-0.
Yeah.
Apart from England beat Egypt 1-0, so we topped the group. Then the other three had to draw lots to see. No, sorry, Ireland and Holland had to draw lots to see who came second, and then Egypt just got knocked out with this last-minute goal against England. So they were quite good. And then obviously in the last World Cup, they had a real disappointment. Like, you got to remember, Salah wasn't all there, was he? Because of
injured.
Was injured.
And everything in the European Cup final. So I think, yeah, hopefully the thing is, it's quite tough to qualify for the World Cup if you're an African team, because five countries I think get through, and it's really, you know, it's really quite savage, the qualifying process. You're out if you want to.
Is that process quite similar to the South American?
No, they have groups of 4, I think, and then they have like a preliminary qualification, and they go into like a
win group, and then you normally have a playoff.
Exactly. Yeah, and one thing I've noticed about African football is in terms of the qualifiers, no one seems to win away from home. It's just like it's so difficult to win away from home. The home advantage there is insane.
Yeah, you got to think there's the different conditions that you've got such a massive continent. Like,
yeah.
All over, you know, and like you could be from North Africa in your summer, and you fly to a Southern African team, you're suddenly like in cold winter. So you know, it's big. It's quite a leveler, I think, and that's why a few, you know, more of the minnows have started to qualify for tournaments now and then. So that's good. I think, you know, it helps to if we can, you know, see more countries getting to tournaments like that, it's only going to help the overall standard. So it's good.
100%, man. Ed, I appreciate you for joining us, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Really, it has.
No, thanks very much. It's been great. Yes, time's flown. I can't believe how quickly.
Now it's gone. Where can people find? I know it's on Amazon, but is there a particular point you would like to find people? Let people find your book?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to my Twitter, I've got like a pinned tweet which links you to the Amazon one, but it's at Waterstones as well, and a few other places. I think you can. I think WH Smith as well. But yeah, please try and you can get it on Kindle as well, actually, and not just in the UK. So yeah, please spread the word and like tell all your friends and stuff like that. I just want as many people to try and read it as possible, because it's a subject that's really important, I think, for people to know about.
Sure.
Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks very much. It's been great fun.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Okay. What?
Take care.
Bye.
When I spit bars in a rave, man, I go hard like Santan.